Introducing the Bite Me Cannabis Club. The Bite Me Cannabis Club aims to be an inclusive online space for cannabis lovers. Whether you're simply curious about how cannabis can improve your life or you're fully seasoned, there's always more to learn. When you join the Bite Me Cannabis Club, you'll have access to like-minded people interested in cannabis, monthly workshops, live Q&As, recipes and recipe swaps, digital cookbooks, fully functional chat feature, and a whole lot more. For a limited time, it's only $5 a month with a 30-day free trial so you can try it out and see if it's right for you. This isn't just another Facebook group or confusing Discord channel. I carefully chose a platform that offers a clear, uncluttered, and seamless community experience. See for yourself, join today, say hello. I can't wait to connect with you there. Join the Bite Me Cannabis Club today. Link in your podcast app. In this episode, we're doing a brand new type of infusion, Canna Flour. Welcome to Bite Me, the show about edibles, where I help you take control of your high life. I am your host, Marge, and thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time and attention. This podcast wouldn't exist without listeners just like you. So before I get into this week's very unique recipe, I just wanted to mention a book that I've been reading lately, a book on Julia Child. It's actually, what is it called? I've been reading it for the last a week and a half. My Life in France by Julia Child and co-authored by her grandnephew, Alex Proudhomme, I think his last name is, or Proudhomme. My French is a little bit rusty, although I do speak a little bit of French. Je peux parler un petit peu de français, mais mon français est très rouillé. That was me saying I can speak a little bit of French, but my French is pretty rusty. I really feel like I should be picking it up again. I was one of those French immersion students back in the day. I think it was a brand new thing when I was first starting out in school. My parents decided to enroll me into this French immersion program, which meant I was learning French from the age of kindergarten all the way through high school. And I actually got pretty proficient at French by the end. I was good at French grammar, reading, writing, comprehension, all that stuff. But of course, I got out of school and didn't really use it too much. And if you don't use it, you lose it. My sister, on the other hand, had numerous jobs finishing high school, after high school, and used quite a bit of French. And now she's still pretty bilingual. So I have a little bit of envy there, but that's on me. So what can I do? But there is quite a bit of French in this autobiography that was that I could understand. So that's kind of nice. I haven't lost it all. But in any case, Julia Child, for those of you who don't know, she's now passed away quite a while ago. I'm not really sure when. But she was an American woman who lived in France for a time and really got into French cooking. And I shouldn't say just got into it, because she became a master French cook and ended up writing a cookbook. She co-authored it with a couple of other women, and it became a national bestseller back in the United States. And then she started her life on television, doing television shows, which is, I think, where a lot of people know her from more, maybe even more so than her cookbooks. But in any case, I just recall Julia Child because my mother, who also really loved to cook, intrigued my mother, because my mother had traveled around the world herself, and Julia Child really appealed to her. And I'm pretty sure she had some of her cookbooks too. And now I would do anything to get my hands on those books, because my dad certainly doesn't have them anymore. But that is something I'm going to be trying to thrift. I could go out and buy Mastering the Art of French Cooking, which is the book that she initially wrote with her two co-authors. And then they went on to write a volume 2. And that one she co-authored with one of the other authors. And from what I can tell from this biography that I'm reading, it was almost an encyclopedia on French cooking. And I feel like anytime you pick up a book like that is sort of like the definitive work on a particular subject, that you're certain to learn something new and be able to enhance your own skills in the kitchen, because I'm by no means close to even professional. And I understand that my technique can always use some refining in many areas, and I really do enjoy cooking. So that's something I'm going to be looking to thrift because, again, I could just hop on to Amazon and try and find it or get it very easily, very quickly. But sometimes it's kind of fun to thrift these things. And then not only that, you save a ton of money. In case in point, I recently listened to a podcast, and the story of the person that was in the interview was so compelling that I did do that. I just went and I bought her book off Amazon. It was just a paperback, so it wasn't too expensive, but I bought it and it arrived at my house within a couple of days, and I haven't started reading it yet, because I have been reading this book about Julia Child and her life in France and her 50-year marriage also with her husband, which seemed very interesting as well because they had a unique and very loving relationship, and he was a huge supporter of hers during the years that it took to write this cookbook. And in any case, I bought this book, and then my daughter was out thrifting, and she's just like, so how much did you pay for your book? Because she had heard the same podcast. She was the one that sent it to me actually and said, you need to listen to this one. And she was out thrifting, and what do you know? She found the book and paid about $4.50 for it. And I definitely paid more than that. So thrifting is a fun way to find things that other people don't want anymore. They've given them away for some reason or another. And then you can enjoy them for a fraction of the cost. So sometimes I feel like thrifting can be a lot more fun too when you are looking for something specific. You're trying to keep your eye out, and as long as it's not something you need like straight away, it can make thrifting more interesting and challenging, I guess. And I always do love to check out the thrift stores. My daughter, who owns a vintage shop, as I've mentioned before, and my husband really likes to look for books too, like old books. I'm not really into that, but I do like to go to the book section, and I like to look for cookbooks or anything else that might catch my eye, the next novel I'm going to read or something like that. I have seen some cannabis cookbooks out there. They're not as easy to find. You don't see them as often, maybe because they haven't been around for as long, but it's a good way to pick up those types of books for your library or collection as well. You never know, or anything you might want for your kitchen or that type of thing. So that's something else I like to try and keep my eyes open for. I haven't found too many yet, but I actually have seen a couple, but they weren't really ones that I wanted to add to my collection. I wasn't too eager to add them to my collection because sometimes, even if something's super cheap, you don't really need it, or you're not going to use it, then there's really no point in picking it up because it's something you're probably just going to have to dispose of later. Maybe even return it, donate it to the same thrift store you bought it from. So in any case, that can be a fun and interesting challenge to try and find cool, especially cannabis related things, because they are a little harder to find, but keep your eyes peeled. Next time you step into a thrift store, you never know what you're going to find. Now on to today's recipe. This one is a little bit different, and it does harken back to Ardent, because I am doing this series on Ardent recipes from their website because I am hoping to have Chanel, who is the inventor of the device, on the show. So if you have any questions that you would love to ask her, let me know, and I'll make sure that I add them to the list of questions that I've been working on. But in any case, this one came from their website, and I was super interested in it because I have never even thought about trying Canna Flour. And most of the time you think of edibles, you think of decarbing and then making it into an infusion so you can use it in your recipe of choice. But sometimes you don't have an infusion ready to go, but you might have decarbed cannabis. And Canna Flour, it says right from the website here, is the perfect method for infusion when you're fresh out of options. If you're making an infused bread, for example, you might not be able to get that too much infused oil into the recipe unless you're making something like a focaccia, naan, or something like that, because they're known for their oily textures. And in my own thoughts on this, I would have to agree because I do make bread on a regular basis. And in that particular bread recipe that I follow, which is I do it by memory now, of course, because I've made it so many times, but it's essentially flour, water, and salt. And there isn't really a way to add in any infusion if I wanted to do that. Now, of course, there's always ways to add it afterwards. You could always put just you can always add in like an infused topping of some kind if you want, infused butter, for instance, right on top and eat it that way. I mean, that's a super simple way to get some cannabinoids into your system. But what if you wanted to make something that is more flour-based that doesn't have a lot of fat in it? Well, Canna Flour come to the rescue, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Pair that with the fact that cannabis concentrates are a bit harder to find in some areas, and that some folks are using their homegrown plants to infuse their food, and we've got what seems like an issue for finding the perfect dose for an entire loaf until Canna Flour steps into the picture, that is. Canna Flour adds color and dimension to baked goods of all kinds, and we're going to follow their easy to use directions below. So I will link to this article in the show notes, and I'll have it written out as well, as I typically do. It'll be in the show notes there. And then this is the type of recipe I'd also add to the recipes page on the website too, if you're looking for something specific, or if you're looking on that page as well. So how do we get started? It's super simple. Canna Flour essentially uses the instant edible method to make an infused, pre-measured ingredient that can be added to all types of baked goods, including cookies, cakes, breads, and more. Using the instant edible method comes in handy too, because there's no loss during the infusion step. You're eating all the available cannabinoids in the weed itself. It's just hidden decoratively in plain sight throughout the meal. When you store Canna Flour, it's also pretty discreet. Even if you use a see-through container, you usually can't tell that the ultra-fine specks of cannabis are from the flour itself. This might depend on the type of flour you're using too, of course. And of course, you should always carefully label whatever it is that you are storing. So don't forget, even if for the discreetness, don't forget to label it somehow so that people know that it's an infused flour and they're not going to grab it and use it in something inadvertently and dose themselves when they weren't expecting to. But basically and I guess what they're saying as well here, which kind of makes sense, is when you decarb your cannabis, you're going to you're decarbing at such a temperature to preserve the cannabinoids and some of the terpenes as best you can during that decarbing process, but you probably do lose some more of the cannabinoids during the infusion process because you're heating it again. And of course, that doesn't happen when you're skipping that whole infusion process, because essentially what you're going to do is you are going to start by decarbing. So you have to have decarbed flour for this one. This is not one of the ones where you can skip that step, because otherwise you're not activating your cannabis, and then it's not going to be very potent at all. That would be just like, grinding up your weed and just eating it. And it's certainly not going to be as effective as it should be. Now, of course, if you have an Ardent Nova or an Ardent FX, the Nova is the one that's just for decarbing. And it's a wonderful I have an Ardent FX, so it can decarb and infuse. And I really do enjoy that machine a lot. I find the decarbing is almost scentless, especially compared to the traditional oven method. Now, of course, if the oven method works for you and you don't have roommates or young children or people who are going to complain about it, or nosy neighbors, or you live in a place where it's not legal, because obviously that has a whole other host of ramifications. So we want you all to stay safe out there. The oven method works just fine. It is great. That's what I've used for years. Now, of course, if you are concerned about smell, the Ardent is a wonderful tool to use for that. And it actually holds quite a bit of cannabis. You can kind of pack it in there a little bit too. So you can do quite a bit of cannabis. And because it doesn't make any sound and it's virtually scent free, then you don't have to worry about disrupting the smell in your house, because your whole house will smell toasty if you do it in the oven. Ardent did also just come out with a new lid for their devices that is supposed to keep the smell down even more. So if this is something that is a real concern, that's something else to consider. But in my personal experience, I find the lid that just comes with the device works pretty great. And there might be a little bit of smell, but for me, I didn't notice very much at all. Further, you can also use a sous vide device as well. So an immersion circulator. So that's another option too, because you're going to be closing off a bag and doing it in a hot water bath. It might take a little longer, but it is also going to be scent free because it's all contained in an airtight, obviously waterproof bag so that the weed doesn't get wet. So there's a few different ways to skin the cat, as they say in this one. So you can do it whichever way that works best for you. Then once you decarb the flour, you're going to decide I can't talk today. Once you decarb your cannabis, you're going to decide how much you want to put in your flour. What they're suggesting here is 1 to 5 grams of ground decarbed cannabis flour per cup. And they are saying you can use an whole wheat, bread flour, almond flour, all-purpose flour. So basically any kind of flour that you can think of, anything. I typically use an organic, unbleached all-purpose flour that I use for making bread and all kinds of stuff. It's the flour I would use for most things, actually. But the almond flour, of course, is intriguing too for people who are trying to stay away from gluten. But any flour will work. So after you decarb, and if you are like me and you do quite a bit of decarbing at first, you might have a bunch of decarbed flour in your pantry, then it's going to be even faster. So the only thing is you are going to want to grind up that flour. Most of the time you don't have to grind it up. You can just throw it on the pan, put it in the oven. Same with the Ardent or your immersion circulator. You don't need to pre-grind this stuff. Half the time I don't even pick up the sticks or anything like that because it's all going to get strained. But you're going to strain it anyway. So in this particular instance, though, it's pretty important that you grind up the amount of decarbed cannabis that you're going to be adding into the flour so that it mixes in uniformly and easily. So you might be using like a spice grinder of some kind, or you can just do it by hand with like a regular grinder of any kind. You just want to have it ground up finely. And now that I think about it, I can't even remember how I did it because I have a coffee grinder, which I did not use for that because I kind of want to keep the coffee grinder for the coffee. And I have on my list to buy myself another little spice grinder. If you have a little spice grinder, that would probably work really well too. I probably just ended up grinding it in a hand grinder. A mortar and pestle would probably work as well if you have one of those and you're just wanting to go super old school. Once you do that, you're going to take that ground up material. And this is a case too where you do want to pick out the stems, as I mentioned. And then you're going to add it to your cup of flour. You close the lid on that jar and then you shake. And it's going to obviously intersperse your ground up material in with the flour. It's going to look a little speckled. It might depend, of course. If you're using like a whole wheat flour, sometimes you can see like it'll probably hide it a little better. But if you're using like an all-purpose flour like I did, it's going to look a little speckled. But that's about it. It's super easy. And that's why this is another one of those quick little tricks you can use. And I'm really glad I discovered this. I never would have really thought of doing something like this. I'm not sure why, because sometimes I think that you're going to have like a really nutty taste, but I did use it for a recipe that they recommended after this one. And they say use your 1 cup of flour that you've made, Canna Flour, in place of any cup of flour in any recipe. So if you're making a batch of cookies, this is a way to make them stronger if you want, because you could use the cookies in place of, or some of the flour in place of this Canna Flour, along with your infusion that you're going to be putting in with that recipe. That would apply to like muffins or whatever the case might be. So it is a way also to add more cannabis to your baking. Yeah, and it's super easy. So what I'm going to do as well with this recipe, because it's so well done, is they include a recipe for making cannabis infused pita bread. And I did try that as well. I've never made pita bread before, and I thought, whoa, this should be fun. And I really enjoyed making them. And so I ended up with infused pita bread. And that was great, dipped with hummus or whatever toppings that you want to throw on it. Sometimes amazing for making sandwiches and stuff. And if you know what the potency of your pitas are going to be, and it's good to sort of figure that out before you go, then you might have something. You could keep it lower dose so that it's almost like a micro dose, if you will, for during the day, or make it a little stronger for more of those evening snacks. And what they say here about that particular one, and honestly, the cannabis-infused pita bread is super easy because you're just using 2 cups of flour. 1 cup is your all-purpose flour. Your 2nd cup is going to be the Canna Flour that you've just made. You can also add a teaspoon of Canna salt. I just use regular salt because even though I do actually have Canna salt in my cupboard, I just use regular for now because I wanted to see what it was like with just the flour. You're going to need some instant yeast and water. Oh, and you do need a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. And once again, this can be medicated or unmedicated. So this particular recipe, you have a few different ways you can infuse it. You can do it all with all three infusions, or you can do it with just the flour. But you preheat your oven to 500 degrees. And they say here, because the activated cannabis is encapsulated in the dough, the internal temperature won't reach levels that will burn your cannabinoids off. So if you're wondering about that high temperature, it's not going to ruin the effect. So you're going to let the baking sheet preheat inside the oven. In a bowl, combine flour, Canna Flour, salt, yeast, water, and the oil. Mix until shaggy. Add a light brush of oil on each side of the dough, and then you're going to let it rise for a little bit, an hour and a half. Then you roll it into 6 equal pieces, form into balls. You'll let them rise again. So that's the thing with making pita bread. These types of breads are fantastic, but they do require a little bit of advanced planning sometimes. And then you roll them out flat. Let them rise another 15 minutes, and then you bake them in the oven. I did 2 at a time as they suggested. It said to bake them for 3 minutes. And I found that they needed a little bit more time than that. And I think after you do a couple of them, you sort of realize what they might look like. And of course, again, this is why I like to make these and then before I do them for the show, because sometimes oven temperatures and ovens can really vary quite a bit. So they were really easy to make and pretty fun. And they actually did have the pocket on the inside of them. Again, I found I needed a bit more than the 3 minutes, but they didn't take that long to bake once you had done all that stuff. And there are a lot of steps to this one, but most of it hands-off time, not hands-on time. So don't let that discourage you from trying these out some afternoon when you have a little bit of extra time in your kitchen. I think you'd really enjoy it. But I would love to hear, have you ever made Canna Flour before? And how did you like it? And what did you use it for? Did you use it in combination with an infusion or salt or something like that as well? Or just straight up the Canna Flour? I think that's it for this week, folks. I hope you have a good one. And until next week, my friends, stay high. Fuck. Sorry. I'm totally got distracted there. What they call here Canna Flour is essentially... And I just want to say thanks for being here. Thanks. Thanks a lot, everybody. Are you tired of trying edibles that are inconsistent in strength and flavor? Attempting to figure out your tolerance? Do you want to take control of your edibles experience and find the optimum combination of factors that results in the best outcome? If so, this edibles journal is perfect for you. The Bite Me Edibles Journal provides a convenient and organized way for you to track and record your edibles experience, whether it's homemade edibles or store-bought. It includes 48 fillable pages. It's sized 8.5 by 11 for plenty of writing space, includes information on calculating the potency of homemade edibles, and it was created by an edibles expert. Whether you're a seasoned edibles enthusiast or just starting out on your cannabis journey, the Bite Me Edibles Journal is an essential tool for anyone interested in enjoying their edibles to the fullest. Take control of your high life with this convenient and helpful resource. Add it to your Amazon cart today. Tap the link in the show notes.